Seventh round of hello, welcome to the seventh round of second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament 2024. In the sixth, after the sixth round, we have Grandmaster Alexei Fedorov of Belarusia leading the tables with 5.5 points, and we have 3 players on 5 points, followed by 12 players on 4.5 points. A lot of competition there for the top honors, and the games have just begun. Let's see the moves quickly. What has happened? Dipan Chakravarti, Indian Grandmaster, playing against Fedorov. Dipan is white, Fedorov is black, and game goes e4. Favorite opening of Dipan Chakravarti, and then there goes Sicilian defense. Fedorov has always played Sicilian defense here, and knight f3, knight c6, and d4, cd4, knight d4, and queen b6, knight b3, knight f6. Not a very popular opening, originally played by Grandmaster Paulsen almost 2 centuries back, but then rejuvenated by Greek Grandmaster Grivas. And with correct play, this system doesn't really offer good chances for black, and the only purpose that could be to take the opponent away from the existing theory. It seems that it has actually worked out, because Dipan Chakravarti, who blitzed out the move otherwise, has been thinking for some time, and we are very interesting, or rather we are going to see a very original game, because apparently white is out of the opening preparation. Let's move to the second board. So in second board, we have players with, again we have players with 5 points each, yeah, and the 2 players, and we have got Tehbaz Arsh of Iran playing against Boris Savchenko of Russia. So, yeah, just a minute please. We'll join you in a second and start discussing the games. Don't go away.
IPS officer, Makran Devskar sir, Police Commissioner of Indore. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for having me here.
And sir is also a very good chess player.
That's a questionable and a debatable point.
We are having this Grandmaster tournament so that the Indian players get a chance to get Grandmaster title. So basically, a Grandmaster is the highest title, is a prestigious one, and every chess player aspires to be a Grandmaster. So the purpose of holding such a tournament is to give opportunity to non-Grandmasters to become Grandmasters.
Sir, actually I am just a really amateur player. Means we have thrived on your quizzes and your in Times of India some 20 years back. So can you just tell me what is International Master, what is Grandmaster, what is Super Grandmaster? Well, how do you reach to that level?
Yes, I think a very nice question, sir. And Grandmaster is the highest title. Super Grandmaster is just a common phrase, but the FIDE gives a few titles depending on the excellency. So the lowest one is, of course, start with FIDE rating, which is not a title. Rating starts, and as a player improves, the rating goes up, and then there's a chance of becoming Candidate Master. That's the first title. Candidate Master is reasonably lower title, and a player with about 1,000 to 2,000 hours of work could generally become Candidate Master quite easily. And then comes the FIDE Master. The title FIDE Master is a little higher, and we have fewer FIDE Master. Then it becomes International Master.
Yellow rating required to become a FIDE Master?
FIDE Master, originally it was 2,300 rating, which was very high, but now I think you touch a rating of 2,200 once in your lifetime, that's good enough. So it's comparatively lower, but Candidate Master is about 2,000 rating, and Grandmaster, in order to become Grandmaster, you have to have a performance of 2,600 three times in three different tournaments, and the International Master, it's a performance of 2,450. I think Akshat got his International Master title about 2011, more than 10 years back, and I think he has left his pursuit to the highest title. His Grandmaster is the highest title, and International Master is the second highest. So he has left his pursuit on the way and joined the organizing team.
Yeah, he is trying to create many Grandmasters now.
Yeah. And I'm also, after this, I'm trying to complete my Grandmaster title as well. I have one GM norm. Last year only I completed. And it was very surprising that we organized this first Indore GM tournament in April, and in May I played the tournament and I scored my GM norm. So I'm hoping the same this time.
All the best, all the best.
Thank you. And we all know like Praveen Thipse sir is the first player to score a Grandmaster norm from India. That's a very unique record, no one is having.
So we are going to see on the next 4 days, we are going to see the games live. At the same time, we are also going to have some question answer sessions, and we're trying to. So, sir, it would be nice if you could place an event sometime, or maybe the inter-service. I think the services events in the in the government service, and there are also in the judiciary, but also in the IAS and IPS cadre, and certainly that's where we are looking forward to support from the government from all angles of development. Private sector, public sector, everything. So we expect your participation in such events.
Sure.
Yes.
Recently, Devskar sir participated in civil services tournament, and he defeated in the first round. He defeated 2,200 player, who eventually became the champion of this event. And sir also qualified for the national championship. He selected. He came fourth from MP state. But due to the work pressure, he won't be playing, I guess, nationals.
Yeah, it's tough. Less like my elder brother was a regular national player. He played for India as well, and then he joined judiciary, so it was not possible to carry on. So these are some of the things. But I think as long as there is fire and the passion continues, I think we could really continue enjoying the game. And chess is a game which doesn't require big fields. You just have it on the at the home. I mean, a partner or just a computer. So I think it's easiest to play, and that's how we look forward to promote it further. Any suggestions, sir, from your side? How do we go about?
Yeah, what we can do is actually we Madhya Pradesh as such, it has got no Grandmaster as of now. So, what I feel that for example, I have seen the schools, chess is a neglected sport, and also where what all coaching classes are there, at least in schools, in some schools they actually give coaching for chess also. In Gwalior I have seen that. But somehow I feel that it doesn't have that professional content of how to teach chess to kids is a neglected subject in MP in particular. I can't say about the rest of India, but there should be a sort of a drilled manual sort of a thing to teach chess to kids, so that they have beautiful concepts developed by the time they are say 7, 8, 9. That is a thing which I think we can plan in future.
Yeah, in fact, after in 2019, about 4 years back, after my retirement, I decided to devote more into the coaching angle, and I'm the chairman of the Trainers Commission of All India Chess Federation as well as the Asian Chess Federation. And our motto is to create trainers who could teach in a proper way. What happens is there are many trainers in the country, but because they are not necessarily aware of the best methods to take the best from the child. So a lot of children struggle because of this, and as Usain Bolt has said, and even Saina Nehwal has said, that your first trainer should be very good. And how could you have a first trainer good if you have to teach, say, 10 lakh children or 1 crore children, for example? So as a result, what we have planned is, under the leadership of All India Chess Federation, basically it's All India Chess Federation's project, me and 5 of my collaborators, international masters and grandmasters, we have written a syllabus which will be available on All India Chess Federation's website. It's about 300 pages or 300 odd pages syllabus, which has been divided into 2 parts. One is the basics, where a school teacher could just read it, or a parent could read it and teach it to a child. I mean, it's just a simplified language where a grown-up person learns and teaches it well. And second is, of course, a bit advanced, but this is a thing we have worked out. It should be available. At the same time, I just conducted a seminar at Jaipur, that was trainer seminar. So the question paper comes from World Chess Federation FIDE, and we train on those specific topics. And after 3 days of training, children, the students basically appear for the exam, which again the examiners are also from FIDE. Last year we had 150 such trainers, and this is the way we wish to grow to this. So in MP, I think there are quite a few trainers, but no FIDE. FIDE senior trainer is the highest title, but there are only 6 in India, and FIDE trainer is a next title. We have about 20 FIDE trainers, but then there comes FIDE instructors and national instructors. National instructor is good enough to go and teach in any part of the country, and then we have a development instructor, which is at the lowest level. So just like playing with these titles at the FIDE level, and we try to make it a professionally viable for people those are not very strong players to become chess trainers and give a proper guidance to the children who have talent but do not have the direction. Because if you give a wrong direction, as Socrates says, you give wrong direction and they go in different sides. So that is what our attempt is. And I think perhaps it's possible to conduct a few seminars under this FIDE. Nowadays these programs are sponsored by Sports Authority of India. So basically in Jaipur it was all the expenses of trainers were covered by the Sports Authority of India, and it was only the participants who had to look after themselves. I think these are the initiatives. Our government has a very good policy of creating trainers in order to have a bigger base and to have more trainers, say thousands of chess trainers with international degree. That is what we are looking at. Every school will have a qualified trainer rather than a random trainer. At the moment, what happens is somebody who is known to play chess is just called and he teaches, and okay, they do their work, but they're not aware of the syllabus. They haven't studied chess, and they haven't studied in the way it should be taught. Like in academics, we can't say that, okay, I will teach geography, and today I want to teach history of Kerala or something, or just the Kerala. And you have to talk about if you're talking about geography, then you teach them everywhere all over the world. And that's what happens when a smaller trainer who has not had exposure gets to children. He or she gives his or her best, but that best may not be adequate. And what we need is adequate. So I think perhaps we could have even not sponsored by All India Chess Federation, at your own expenditure, you could have some, so that you have at least 2 trainers in every district, or perhaps at least in the district capitals, 1 or 2, and you could really look forward to going better, doing it better than other states, because other states are only waiting for the SAI program. So I think that could be a suggestion. I think, Akshat, if you could think.
Sure, sir. Definitely, we will try to hold one FIDE seminar in Madhya Pradesh. And recently, I was also like the lecturer in Bhubaneswar. I'm also a FIDE trainer. So we did, and few MP players also, they participated in it. And we also trying to make more trainers and arbiters team also, so that we can run our chess activities smoothly and promote chess culture much better in a smooth way. And in future also, we are trying to plan a few national championships for the kids, under 7, under 9, and some rating tournaments are under process.
In fact, chess is a unique sport where by playing a game itself, a personality development takes place. I remember Benjamin Franklin, founder father of USA. He has written a chess book. That's the first chess book available. Basically, it's Morals of Chess, and he has written about chess very highly. He spoke about chess, that chess is not mere idle amusement. Several important human qualities start to be developed and nurtured by it, ready to be used at all times. Now, or case of Michael Duchamp. Michael Duchamp says is while every artist is not a chess player, every chess player is an artist. So there are some of the things I think we fail to, or simple, I think, considering the violent temperament, and Sigmund Freud says a chess player cannot be physically violent. So these are the things which need to taken into the front, because playing chess may not be the agenda, but that my child will not be aggressive, unnecessarily aggressive or violent. That could be EQ, development of EQ. The Bombay Cambridge, I met the chairman once in Mumbai during their visit. He said that our interest is not in IQ any longer. We are interested in good EQ so that people are normal, and that is why we are introduced chess in every school. So that's, I think, something we also should look at. EQ probably, and the behavior, considering the suicides and other things. I think the behavior of human being may be is more important than their ability, natural ability, while intelligence. So some of these factors we need to market it, not in a wrong way market. We just have to take it to people and induce the parents to take it to their children, make it sure that children play. And okay, not everybody can become a champion, but yes, you have a child which cannot be called a fool. So that's, I think, a good quality perhaps, isn't it? How about that, sir?
Thank you so much for having us here. And it was a great opportunity for me to interact with the legend. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Praveen sir, for coming to Indore and also being a wonderful commentary. I request all our viewers to watch and learn more about the intricacies of chess. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So welcome back to the 7th round of second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament, the second edition at this city. We have had 6 rounds before, and one player with 5.5 points is leading. That's Alexei Fedorov, and Alexei Fedorov is from Belarusia or Belarus. And there are 3 players who are on 5 points, and quite a lot. I think 16 players on 4.5 points. Tense battle being fought for the trophy. We have 4 more games. Today is one of them. In the round 7, we had begun the games, and let's see how the games go. We have this now the second board. Let's go to the first board where we had just begun the match, and for a change Dipan Chakravarti was taking more time than his opponent, so something very interesting. Grandmaster Dipan Chakravarti from Tamil Nadu is one of the prominent grandmasters in the country and very well prepared in the opening, and their players go with a normal Sicilian defense. Dipan is white and Alexei Fedorov plays black, and he plays Queen b6, a move that has basically been played over 170 years back, but then it had lost its importance, and eventually it became popular around 3 decades back when Grandmaster Grivas from Greece started playing it, and in fact it's called Grivas variation, but not a fantastic opening. I myself defeated Grivas in the Olympiad 1992 in this variation. So if white plays correctly, white gets an advantage. There are some of the things black should avoid, and let's see. And knight b3 is a forced move here. The knight needed to be guarded, and knight c3. Bishop d3 was a viable alternative as well. Knight c3 is fine. e6, and we have bishop d3 and d6, not necessary yet, but eventually has to be played, and queen e2. This is a popular line, but I personally prefer to castle and go king h1 in this way, but yes, this is also a possibility. Bishop e7, bishop e3. Not a necessary move. Black queen is very awkwardly placed on b6, and black is not happy with this queen because black's usual plan in Sicilian defense is to attack along the c line. And how does one attack along the c line when there is knight in between? And how does black attack the e4 point? The 2 points. One is to attack along the c file with a rook and attack the e4 point. These are the basic plans of black side in Sicilian defense. Now how does one do that? One does it with a6 and b5 and bishop b7 and the rook c8, and then we have a few pieces aiming at e4 and b5 pawn, driving away the knight on c3, and then white's position could become vulnerable. Of course, white has one's own assets, and there is a very balanced position, but the queen on b6 hinders with black's natural plan. Black must anyway go queen c7 or an a6 or a6 and queen c7. Keeping the bishop on c1 was a good logical way of playing it, unless white wants to castle in the queen side, which Dipan has done. If white wants to castle in the king side, then I think just castles and move the king and not move the bishop at all till an appropriate movement comes. That is a good policy. Let's now go to what Dipan plays, a more ambitious line of long castle. And a6, we have a standard Sicilian, but bishop on d3 and queen e2 are comparatively not very accurately placed. At the same time, black is lagging behind in development, having wasted the queen moves, and white may get g4 very quickly. White plays f4. g4 was a very sound alternative as well, f4. And now we see that this is for the first time after this move f4, black is thinking. You can see black has taken about 20 minutes for this move, because f4 is a little diverting from the main plan of g4. And well, I think white has good attacking chances, and let's see, the game is going to be very sharp because white must have h5. Yes, a logical move, and that is where I felt that g4 instead of f4 seemed more logical. Black is now planning to castle in the queen side eventually, but it's not easy. It's like after bishop d7 and castle, it's not possible because white plays knight a4 and white wins. So probably black has to play b5, bishop b7 and then castle on the queen side. And it's very important to have a knight on f6 for black because it's responsible for a lot of defensive possibilities. If white is able to play e5 and drive away the f6 knight, the white knight comes to e4 and becomes very menacing. So black could play b5, bishop b7 and long castle, and the move h5 helps in maintaining the knight on f6 for quite some time. At 3 or 4 moves, white will not be in a position to drive away the knight, which is, I think, quite significant. And then we go to the next game. Here both the players have 5 points out of 6 games. And Taibaz Arsh is from Iran and Boris Savchenko is from Russia. And well, I saw him play around 25 to 27 years back, and he was higher rated then, but he was very young at that time, and now he's experienced and he has now stopped playing in Europe perhaps and has come to India to play. So a nice strong player with a quality understanding of play. Let's see. Taibaz Arsh, I have not seen him play before, but yes, Iran has a very strong line of juniors and sub-juniors, and they are really competing with the Indians. And you know, Indians are at the top in the world and Iranians do compete. So let's see the English opening and a different setup with b3. So double fianchetto setup for black. Black shouldn't have any problems in equalizing, but generally it's the subsequent play that matters. The players who play slow systems are quite successful very often, not because the systems are strong, but because they know the slower systems better than the opponent. It's possible that Savchenko is facing this type of setup only for the first or second time, whereas Taibaz might have played this setup with white for 10 times or 20 times. And that is what matters. We have a roughly equal position. Black has no problems at the moment. And let's see how the strategic play goes ahead from this point. On the third board, we have players with 4.5 points from 6 games, and we have the top seed Indian, the only player who is above 2500 Elo rating, and he is playing against S. Nitin. Indian has played d4 and he has played d4 in these other games as well. So g6. So as we know, d4 knight f6 is the Indian system, and after c4 there are various options. One is to play old Indian defense with d6, or the Queen's Indian defense, Nimzo Indian defense, or Bogle Jobo Indian defense with e6 move. And it's possible to play a Grunfeld Indian defense, and King's Indian defense, and Benoni Indian defense with the second move g6. Also opening called Benko Gambit is possible. So we have the standard position and bishop g7, e and e4. So we got a King's Indian defense, a way of attacking the white king. This is a subtle strategic setup where black wants to go for white king wherever the white king is, at the cost of some strategic considerations. So objectively a tough opening to play for black, but equally tough to play for white as well. A sharp opening. And in Kasparov's words, unless a player has learnt how to play King's Indian defense and the Royal Lopez Spanish, one cannot be called a complete player. So I think a very important comment. So a tough opening which will need a lot of strategic understanding and tactical judgment and sense of initiative and alertness. Very often the King's Indian defense games are like street fighting, and the one who makes the second last mistake often wins because the opponent makes the last mistake. So let's see, bishop e3, simple setup, knight c6, not so popular. e5 was the most accurate setup here, also knight bd7, so d5, knight e5, f4, a very sharp line, and let's see what players have on mind. Black has been driven back, and it seems that white is winning. White has absolute control of center, and white wants to play knight f3, bishop d3, castle, and seems that it's very easy to checkmate black. But look at black's assets. Black has a solid king. It's very solid defensive setup, 4 pawns, 2 knights, a bishop and a rook guarding the king, and it's not easy for white to break through. Secondly, the white pawns could get overextended and be attacked, and this has been successfully played by several world champions and top players in the world. To start with, the first game was played by Dr. Sigbert Tarash, who was world number 2 about 110 years back. But then it was also played by world number 2 David Bronston, and his father-in-law Boleslavsky was one of the greatest pillars of the King's Indian defense, the one who really wrote about King's Indian defense. And then we had Geller, Grandmaster Geller, all from Soviet Union. The first player to play the King's Indian defense successfully after the Second World War was Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer made new theory in this, and his contribution completely changed the dimensions of this game. It became more dynamic than static, but the real contribution to King's Indian defense was by Garry Kasparov. And today what we know about King's Indian defense, I think more than 30% has been contributed by Garry Kasparov. So a very interesting opening, and let's see, knight h3, e6, pawn into pawn, pawn into pawn. So black is yet not challenging the center, and still it's a possible opening. Let's move to board 4 now. On board 4 we have Nilesh Shah playing against S. Aswath. So game doesn't start with the Indian system. It's a queen's gambit. It's a queen pawn opening, and white makes its queen's gambit. The pawn can be taken, and that's why it's a gambit. Black plays e6, not taking the pawn, which means queen's gambit declined. So the first move is queen pawn, and when white plays c4, it's a queen's gambit. And there's a famous serial on that. And e6 is the move which is not taking the gambit. It's called the queen's gambit declined. So one of the most popular openings against queen pawn. Now here there are various options. c5 would lead to semi-Tarrasch, and c6 would lead to the classical variations. c6, e3. White chooses the bishop to keep the bishop on c1. And a strange decision, probably trying to stop the openings like Ragozin defense or Cambridge Spring defense, or there's another opening, Lasker defense. These openings are not possible, but surely the bishop on c1 hemmed in his own pawns is not an asset, and this move may not be looked at a very principled or accurate move, but yes, it's popular because of the slow nature. It's being played a lot these days. Bishop e2, again a simple move, pawn to pawn, a4, a6, castles, bishop d6, so simple developing, knight d2. White wants to take the pawn with the knight and not with the bishop. Knight into pawn, bishop c7. And white wants to probably play f4 and put knight on e5, which means that f4 has to be met with c5. Yes, so h4 and c5. And black should be okay. In queen's gambit declined, black always has problem with c8 bishop. The c8 bishop doesn't have a good square, and if you don't move the bishop, then you can't bring in the a8 rook, which means that you're playing without some part of your army. Now in a battle, when you're equal army, every soldier must take part. Stronger the army on the field, better chances of winning. So black will always have a problem in getting the c8 bishop into play. Now black is not very far. Black has to play b6 and bishop b7, but for that c5 has been played. White has to decide what to do here. White can take isolated pawn on d4, allowing black to capture on d4 and take with the pawn. That would ensure a powerful outpost for the knight at e5. Bishop f3 would be a possible move to prevent black from developing the queen side, and capturing pawn into pawn is another option which is not really likable because then f4 doesn't make any sense. White is thinking, I think, of bishop f3 and knight e5. Both the positions look possible, and Nilesh has taken more time than the opponent. The opponent seems to be more comfortable with regard to time, but position wise, I think after bishop f3, white may have some initiative to come. Although the f4 pawn is weak, d4 pawn is weak, but there will be compensation by way of activity of pieces. Move to the fifth game, and there we have Sham Nikhil playing against Nandita PV. Nandita PV is a woman grandmaster, and she has represented India in many age group categories, and her recent participation for India was in the Chess Olympiad, 44th Chess Olympiad held at Mahabalipuram, Tamil Nadu in July-August 2022. The Indian teams did very well. The India 2 team got a bronze medal in the event. The India 1 team was not able to get, but okay, they finished 4th, and there was a combined effort of the top Indian players which got us the medal. So we have the classical Sicilian, and Nandita has played this opening before, I see, in this tournament. Bishop g5, this famous Roser attack. Grandmaster Roser from Russia had this way of doing it, making bishop g5, queen d2 and long castle, and then trying to put pressure along the d line. And that is the idea. Black plays ace standard moves. Here now there are various moves. Moving the queen is an option. Bishop to e7 is a even bishop to d7 is an option. Bishop e7, so king b1, and now again short castle and bishop d7. There are two options here. Bishop d7 played, and f3, the English attack. English attack was not considered to be a very strong system because it's comparatively slow, and it may not be very useful if black has not castled on the king side. But there have been games, particular game by Grandmaster Vasyukov, late Grandmaster Evgeny Vasyukov, who demonstrated that even if black is castled on the queen side, white could still go away with g4 and h4 and advance the pawns and put a pawn on g6, after which black position becomes very cramped and difficult. So black exchanges knights and advances the pawn. h4 for white, queen c7, logical play. Black is going to castle on the king side, but at appropriate moment. So queen d2, the pawn on c2 was attacked, so queen on d2 and h5. So basically black is posing a question to white. Okay, you wanted to play g4 and drive my knight away. I'm stopping you at g4. How do you get g4 soon? And if you are taking time to play g4, then I could get d5 myself. And if I get d5, and for pawn into pawn, if I can capture with a piece, then I could be in a good position. Excuse me. The pawn on g2, white has to justify the position of bishop on f1, because bishop on f1 cannot go to g2 or h3 now. So the knight must move. Knight d4 looks like a logical square, knight not compared to knight f4. And after knight d4, white is ready to play on the king side, but it's not easy to get g4 because g4 may not be good. And h5 certainly a confusing move, and white is thinking, let's see how long white has taken. Oh, quite some time for this. Probably a opening preparation, and the white has indeed taken 30 minutes for this move now. How to activate the pieces, because in Sicilian defense, white side, white must play active and try to attack the king. Now, which is the target for white, and how does white try to do? White try to get at the target, that is important. So, not an easy plan. Perhaps g3 could be too artificial. g3 and bishop g2 looks like artificial. So he plays actually g3, and black goes b4. So black has made it very clear. Black also play a5, a4 and b3 and create a permanent weakness in black's camp. in white's camp, I'm sorry, black wants to play a5, a4, b3, create permanent weakness in white's camp, and then before white has launched the attack, if black is able to get this, then black suddenly castles on the king's side and brings the remaining pieces to the attack. So surely a confusing position, and let's see how Sham takes this position at. Here we have Ameya Odi of Goa playing against Ilam Parthi of Tamil Nadu. Both of them are international masters. Ilam Parthi is world under 10 and under 14 champion. Ameya Odi, international master. A lot of insights in the game and originality. An active player these days. So a good junior player who had taken a break in order to finish the academics and now playing regularly. Ameya Odi, I think he became international master a couple of years back and now is going for the Grandmaster title. Bishop b4. So a very dangerous system played by black. This system was a popular system over a century ago, and then it was proven that after e5, black is in a bad way. So the importance of this opening is lost. Knight d5, queen g4. He gave it, bishop d2. Black has moved the king, and there's no real justification. This position is supposed to be good for white. It's a theoretical position which is better for white. So what Ilam Parthi has on his mind, we'll come to know. Queen h3. Okay, so queen wants to move to h3 instead of any other square. White keeps the option of f4 at right movement. But first, white has to do something about the e5 pawn and d4 knight, which he solves by taking the knight. Which pawn to recapture? D pawn should recapture, but then the open d file could lead to some awkward movements. White would want to play long castle, knight e4, and then a piece would land at d6. And if you play the b pawn, none of this can be stopped, but the position is even worse. So I think committal move, knight c6, something like d6 was perhaps preferable, but and knight into c6, pawn into c6, and there should be long castle. White is preferable because black's king is not safe compared to white. So sound, solid position. Perhaps pawn into knight and long castle. There could be queen a5. Interesting move. It's possible to have multiple complex pawn structural possibilities, and white may have to choose one of them. So is black. Black is at the moment thinking for knight and knight. The change of pawn structure possible, and whenever there is a change of pawn structure possible, then we have to look at both the aspects and looks into pros and cons of both the captures, and then decide on which is the optimal at this particular stage. Right way of doing it is to take time. So fine, Ilam Parthi is doing taking break, or rather taking lot of time for the moment where he should take, because he has to make a fundamental decision regarding a pawn structure. Pawns cannot move back. So once you move a pawn at a particular square, then you can't really hope to get a position where the piece originally was. All other pieces can come backward and they can actually get into optimal positions even if they are backward. Backward moves are possible, but pawn doesn't go backward, and that is the reason why black has to think accurately before this. Let's have a look at the sponsors of this event. This event has been sponsored by several private sector companies, and the main is Indore Waste Management, the Red Cross Society, Path Foundation, Navin Florin, and Goyal Group, Dilip Buildcon, Kirloskar Brothers, HDFC Bank, and Mega Developers. A large number of sponsors. We have this tournament in two categories. One is the Masters category, one is the Challengers category. The Master category has 131 participants from 14 countries, and it includes 16 countries, and the field includes 10 grandmasters, 10 international grandmasters, 2 international women grandmasters, and 25 international masters trying to strive for the highest title, that's the grandmaster title. And the great effort, half of the players in the tournament, more than half of the players in the tournament are title holders, which means that they already have a degree of FIDE. Grandmaster is the highest degree of FIDE, but there are other degrees as well, international master and FIDE master. So that we have title holder players who are fighting for a higher title, and then the entire event is has a prize money of 35 lakhs, out of which 21 lakh goes to the Masters event and 14 lakhs goes to the Challengers event, which has attracted 287 participants from around 4 or 5 countries, India being the largest contingent. But yes, even this tournament is very attractive, and various players have come from abroad, from Vietnam, from Bangladesh, from Nepal, Sri Lanka. Players have been for Zimbabwe. Players are playing into this category as well. So 2 events going on side by side, and we have a strong field of 10 grandmasters, 2 women grandmasters, and 25 international masters in the main event. That is the one which we are seeing here. And we go to the board 6. They're still thinking. So let's move to the next board. We'll be able to view 15 boards. So here we have Hisham Abdul Rahman of Egypt, grandmaster, playing against Gautam Krishna of India. Gautam Krishna is untitled player, I believe, not an international master or grandmaster. And it's going to be an important, interesting battle because Gautam has been playing well. Hisham Abdul Rahman is, of course, a famous player. His first visit to India, and let's see what opening he has played. Let's see how the game has gone. So here too we have a King's Indian defense. In one of the games we already had King's Indian defense, and here too you have I think Inyan's game was a King's Indian defense, and this also is a King's Indian defense. And that's called Samish variation, named after Grandmaster Samish. Samish variation, the purpose is to strengthen the center with F3. The advantages of this is that you don't have to deploy the defense of E4 pawn to pieces, and pieces being more valuable can do better job at attacking something rather than defending. A very valid idea, and quite a common opening. All Russians play this Samish variation in general, and it's quite a popular one. And that Bobby Fischer, who was himself a King's Indian defense player, he said that Samish refutes King's Indian defense, and yet he played it successfully. But that was his opinion, that Samish is the strongest variation against King's Indian. So let's see how the Egyptian Grandmaster makes use of this opportunity. So black wants to take the pawn on c4. White moves the knight and indirectly guards the pawn. So bishop on f1 now supports the c4 pawn. The bishop on f1 was blocked by the knight on e2. So the pawn was attacked, but the pawn has been defended. And now black is likely to play knight d7 followed by c5. White plays knight b3, exchanging the knights. Knight into knight, pawn into knight. White has a doubled pawn, but the liability of guarding c4 is gone. Now the bishop can be deployed anywhere. And when a pawn moves towards the center, it's always a gain, irrespective of what the position is. And even if you are in a bad position or good position, irrespective of that, a capture towards the center always helps you get a better position. c5, bishop e2, c into d4, bishop into d4, bishop into d4. Capturing the bishop was a strange decision. I was expecting knight e5. Let's see. Black's position is not very good in pawn structurally. White may have a knight coming to d5, but due to the capture on b3, a into b3, the b3 point has become weak, and white can't play b4 because the black knight would come to b3 anyway, attacking queen and the rook simultaneously. So it's a big threat now, And let's see how white guards this. Rook a3. Certainly an awkward move to play. Who wants to use the rook for defensive purpose, and that too with no improved scope? From rook and a1, white had a scope of 4 squares in the A line and 3 squares in the back rank, and now the rook has very limited scope. It has only 2 squares in the, it has only 4 squares in the A line and no other squares. So the piece has been deactivated in order to keep the other pieces active. The piece has been really, the rook has been really used for defense, which could be could prove wrong. But looking at the close nature of the position, not close as such, but not directly latent position or potent position, white can afford to play such a move. e5. Some of the committal moves are not to be understood, and I'm not very comfortable with this move. Black wants to go knight e6 and knight to d4, but it never works, and it gives white a very strong position even if you get a knight on d4. But that looks like the only idea here. Okay, let's move to the next part of the game. Queen d2, queen d1 was valid move as well. Queen d2, knight e6, short castle, knight d4, and the knight has been well placed, but can easily be easily be exchanged with bishop d1 and knight e2. Let's see what course of action white takes here. White is thinking. White is down to 29 minutes. Black still has more time than what he was allotted. Black was allotted a time of 90 minutes to start with. But with every move you make, you gain 10 seconds. So he has played so fast that he has gained tempos. Black has actually gained tempos, and black has, one could presume that black is in a good position because black is playing fast. And white may have some serious problems because white is playing slow. That can be one of the reasons. Queen d2 was played, and knight d4 and bishop d1 looks like a move. But Hisham Abdul Rahman is thinking what to play. I think bishop d1 is a nice move if you want to utilize the knight on d4. But of course, queen b6 is not a great threat if white moves to king to h1. So not a great problem. And let's move to board 8 now, where the I think the first or probably the only international master of Northeast, Sahil plays against Igor Glake. Glake, one of the greatest theoreticians of openings and strategy, has now resides now in Belgium and not in erstwhile USSR, and is still one of the most accurate strategic players. He plays very clinical, and if opponent makes a mistake, he just wins in a way a surgeon completes a sort of simple surgery. So it's a very, very clinical and very accurate and very direct way of playing for the plan. So let's see. Black wants to play eventually e4 sometime at right moment, or d5 depending on where the piece is going. f4 is always a possibility. So black wants to probably play queen d7 as well, or queen c7, and then plan to penetrate somewhere in the position, either e4 break or d5. And then we go to the next round, next board. We have board number 9 here from the 7th round. We are watching the 7th round games of the second Indore International Chess Championship live today. So game of irregular openings by Ratnakaran, Vianney Dikonov, Mangalore playing against K. Ratnakaran of Kerala. Both of them talented players, and Ratnakaran always wants to take the game out of theoretical variations. So black is playing a system where black is playing similar to Indian defenses without actually bringing the knight, which is the essence of Indian systems. So probably black plays knight f6 here, and we have the standard opposition d6. Right? So black wants to prevent if black wanted to prevent e4, black should have played some other move. Now e4 is possible, and black does not have adequate compensation of the passive position. Black has yet to develop the king side piece, the bishop and castle is going to take some time, and white is ready to push the central pawns. White is preferable here. Black's opening choice was not great. But I must say that Ratnagar is a very resourceful player, and I think yesterday or day before he had a very difficult position which he managed to get a draw. So also important, and lot of complex possibilities when they are there. Ratnagar is able to spot it quicker than others. A very fast player. As you can see, white has taken about 10 minutes or 12 minutes. Black has hardly taken any time. And it doesn't mean that black has prepared everything, but a sharp move has been played. It has occurred on the board, h5. Probably a very rash move as well, a sharp and rash. And black is not wanting to advance the pawns further, but the purpose of g4 is still not very clear. White plays logically and drives black's pieces. Knight attacked, knight goes back, and d5. So white has strong center control. So why is black not winning a pawn here? White plays say d into e5. White would play d into e6. If black plays d into e5, white plays d into e6, and then white is ready to take on e5 with a very dangerous pin for black and a serious threats against the pinned piece. So d5, g5. Okay, this game has now gone beyond the strategic concepts, and it's clear that black is jumping directly at the throat of white pieces. Black's pieces are not very well placed, and they're not participating in the battle even after e into d6 and c into d6. The piece is not active, and the advance h5, g5 may not be recommended, but it's an enterprising move for sure. Now opponent's been taking a lot of time now this last moment, one move before, that is, Vianney had consumed about half an hour or more, about 35 minutes, and as you can see, Ratnagar has hardly spent any time, only 10 minutes. So let's see. Ratnagar plays fast, he doesn't need time, and he's always left with a lot of time in the clock, which is not very useful for the next game. So it's very common. And g5, very rash move. You're not even threatening g4 here directly because the other pieces are not joining. But yes, immediate plan is to play g4, and even if you lose the pawn, eventually black is going to try. So I think white may have to capture e into d6 or d into e6 here, and bringing out the black pieces into battlefield. But yes, h3 move has led to some confusion, and black wants to open up g4. And the kings, if the king side is open, then the attack is possible, because the object of the game of chess is to checkmate the opponent, and for checkmating you need some specific minimum material. But once you have that material, you also must have the expertise to how to play that position from the correct side. So we see that a wild battle is going to take place, and apparently white should end up with some advantage here. Let's move to board 10, where we have Kashish Jain playing against De Silva of Sri Lanka. De Silva just won the Asian under 18 championship, and now he wants to play for the norms. So this is a standard variation. We saw one game of this variation before, I think day before, and black goes bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, bishop b6. Black is waiting for white to play d4, and then black would play bishop g4 or something, a4. I think even now b4 weakening the white squares, knight d2. So idea is to drive away some of the black pieces with knight c4, and then perhaps a5 thereafter, and bishop a4. So white develops and black now goes for g5. This is of course a very interesting option. There is a different way of getting out of the pin which is safer, and if black has already castled, then black would actually go queen e7 and bishop e6, and after bishops are exchanged, black knight is out of the pin. But what black does is more direct. Rook b8, short castle, knight c4, bishop a7, knight e3, knight a5, and we have a game wherein black could give some serious threats. Knight into b3 is a threat, cb3 is, bc3 is a more direct threat. Something has to be done about the bishop. But what is that? We don't know, because bishop a2 or bishop c2, both can be met with b3, and the bishop goes to b1, leaving the rook on a1, which means that white is going to play most of the strategic battle without the use of the a1 rook. If white chooses to retreat bishop c2, and if white doesn't want to do that, then white can play perhaps moves like knight d2 is possible, and yeah, but there are not many moves possible, no, but yeah, this move looks like a possibility. Knight d2 as well. Knight a5, black is thinking here. White has spent a lot of time in the opening, perhaps to play moves like bishop g5, not be afraid of g5. It requires some accuracy, and that's where the game is going on. Here it's not logical to decide the result based on the positions, particularly on the lower boards, because the games end in a different fashion, different type than the one which you can compare as actual game. So actual how the things happen. But yes, a standard play and a very complex middle game, and g5 and bishop c3. White must try to get d4. White doesn't get d4, black is comfortable. But again, black also has to decide what to do. It's possible to play queen e7 and king h8, but then what next? Black has to look for some attacking prospects. White drives away the bishop goes back, knight e3, heading for the d5 and f5 squares. Now white is not yet ready for d4 break, and black plays knight a5, attacking the bishop, threatening pawn into pawn, and if the bishop goes to c2 or a2, b3 is a possibility, as we saw. So complex line, and we move to the board 10, board 11 rather. We're in the board 10. Here we have Ayush Sharma, local Ayush Sharma from MP, playing against Sudarshan Bhatt of Karnataka, and let's see another Sicilian here, but this time Sicilian accelerated dragon. So e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, g6. So a variation that is called accelerated dragon, and a variation which doesn't offer complete equality, but a variation that offers counter chances, active play, and a lot of scope for opponent to make a mistake, which is important in the practical game. If one has to write a theoretical book, the most accurate opening, it may not fit into that, but a most complex opening, yes, it could fit into that. So we have the standard position: bishop c4, castles, bishop b3. So there's a famous trap here in the famous game Bobby Fischer versus Samuel Reshevsky. Reshevsky blundered here with knight a5, and then came e5, knight, e5, knight to e8, and bishop into f7 check, king into f7, knight e6, and black lost the unprotected queen on d8 because for knight a5, e5 he had to go knight to e8. So a standard trap, I think known for almost 6 decades now. The common move here is d6, and then white plays h3, and then it's possible to play knight a5. That's what a common move. Rook e8, a very confusing move, and doesn't seem to be really threatening anything. Castle looks like a short castle. That castle looks like a normal move compared to others. And castle played, and d6. Now there's a threat of knight coming to g4, which means h3. Black plays knight to a5. It's difficult to understand what has been gained by rook e8. Why rook in a closed file? Rook, as it can move in a straight horizontal or vertical line, it needs open file in order to exert pressure. Pawns are the pieces which move only one square. So you don't have to see what is there in front of the pawn after 2 or 3 moves. But for rook or bishop, it's very important that the file or the diagonal is open so that the effect of the rook goes till the enemy camp. And here, rook on e8 somehow looks like a very strangely placed piece. The loss of tempo may not be significant, but it's unnecessary for sure. Queen is better on d3 from the point of logic. c4 is a common weakness in Sicilian defense, and that be4 is one of the common weaknesses. b6, bishop b7 is a possibility, and queen would be better on d3 if white really wants to play accurately. Queen d2, not a very productive, useful move. a6 a useful move. f4, and then b5 and e5. Now you see the move rook e8. Had this not been played, if the rook was on f8, then black could have played pawn into pawn followed by knight e8 or some move at equal position. But now we have a problem. Knight into b3 correctly played so that he can capture d into e, a into b3, b4. D into e5 was now possible, but then the knight goes, where does the knight go? Knight goes to d7, white has e6, a lot of initiative. Knight a4 creates a square, an attempt to create a square at d5 or e4. So white thinks, if white takes pawn into knight, black also takes pawn into knight, and both of them lose a knight and a pawn. White's center has been compromised. So there is no more center control, and black has 2 bishops, so black could be doing well. On the other hand, if white moves the knight, then black knight could land at some square. Knight on d5 is not possible. Knight on c6 is a move that could come eventually, like if white moves the knight to a4, and then there's a chance of knight coming to c6. So black must go knight to e4, and attacking the queen. So let's see, b4. Knight a4 more or less looks logical, and after d into e5, f into e5. Black has a comfortable position. e5 was probably premature. Queen should have been on d3 instead of d2, and we don't know if white really has some advantage. So let's move to the next board here, and board 12. On board 12, we have Grandmaster Saptarshi Roy Chaudhary. Saptarshi Roy Chaudhary is playing against Sri Lankan Dilshan. Saptarshi also doesn't believe in opening preparation, plays his own lines, and I've seen him play g3 in this position. King's Indian reverse, but he plays b3 and d5 and bishop b2 and e6, and now we have e3 and then c5. So it's a game which is likely to be similar to what a London system game would be with bishop on c8. It could be something like a reverse Tarash by black side. This setup is a very good setup for black in the sense against any opening in the queen pawn. Against when we play queen pawn openings, we don't really mean only d4 moves. What we mean is queen pawn openings is the openings which are not from e4. So positions starting with English opening c4, or positions starting with knight f3, or positions starting with d4, and even positions starting with first move f4. They all can be met with this setup. The only system that doesn't permit black to get this setup is the e4 opening. So against e4 you will never have this pawn structure for black, but now we have this pawn structure, a comfortable setup, though knight on e, knight could get a square to e5, d4 a strange move, and pawn into pawn was actually possible. Knight b d2. Awkward piece position for white. Bishop on b2 is not very productive, but it could anytime get opened up. So white probably wants to play queen e2 and c4, queen e2, rook c1 and c4 perhaps. But there is a danger of knight b4 coming, trapping the bishop in case of queen e2, which is solved because black plays knight b4 here, which means that the bishop could no longer be trapped with knight b4. So rook c1. So I think he wants to pull back the bishop to b1, play queen e2 thereafter, and decide where to put the rook. Knight on d2 does not have enough scope because there is a pawn on d5 for black. So a pawn 3 squares in front of a knight prevents the knight's moves towards the enemy camp. So rook c8, rook e1, queen e2 instead of queen e2, rook e1. And d line is likely to be opened, and the black queen is still on d8, so it's better to have queen on e2 followed by rook d1, but white plays rook e1, pawn into pawn, pawn into pawn. But so interesting decision. White has what is so-called hanging pawns. The pawns on c4 and d4, they do not have pawn support, and the black's counterparts in that, the b6 and e6 pawns, which are opposing these two pawns. The c4 pawn is being opposed by the b6 pawn, and the d4 pawn is being opposed by the e6 pawn. What is the difference in the status of b6 and e6 pawn? The b6 and e6 pawns, b6 pawn is guarded with a7 pawn, e6 pawn is guarded with f7 pawn, which means that the pawns are safe. They're in open file, semi-open file, but they're safe, and the pawns c4 and d4 cannot be guarded with pawns. They are in open file, and rook can be attacked them, which means that they're not all that safe because they're not in a position to support each other. Yet, what are the advantages of this structure? White has good advantage in space, and excellent chances of excellent chance of kingside attack. White would like to play d5 at opportune moment and capture the f6 knight if possible, and deliver a checkmate on h7 if there's a way. So bishop b1 looks like a standard move to follow for black. If black could really get b5 break, black would be better. It's extremely difficult to get b5 break. So b5 or e5. e5 could be met with d5, and b5 wouldn't be possible generally. So at this stage, white is more pleasant, and position can be preferred for white. Bishop f4, a nice move. The bishop could exert some pressure. Black wants white to play g3, after which black is going to pull back the bishop to b8 and put pressure along the b7 h1 diagonal. The b7 bishop can be opened against the f3 knight if the knight was loose. So the purpose is to provoke move g3, and which white doesn't want to comply with. So knight a5. As soon as the bishop moved from the d3 point, now black starts to attack the c4 point. The bishop on d3 was guarding. At that time it was supported by 3 pieces. Now it's attacked twice and supported twice. So black wants to play bishop a6 here. Black also has a possibility of bishop into d2, and after knight into d2 there could be comfortable moves. Bishop, moving the bishop back to b8 is also planned. So the second edition of Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament being played at the IPSA Academy and Indore Public School. Beautiful venue, and the most of the players are also lodged, accommodated for stay at the academy. So it's a very comfortable state for a player, not needing to travel much before the games. And we had 2 rounds twice yesterday and also on the Wednesday. And during these 2 rounds, it particularly helps. A nice tournament, and the tournament is being sponsored by Indore West Management, Red Cross Society, Path Foundation, Navin Florin, Goel Group, HDFC Bank, Dilip Buildcon, Kirloskar Brothers, and Mega Developers. Quite a few sponsors, 10 Grandmasters and 2 women Grandmasters, a field of 131 participants with more than 50% title holders, and particularly 10 Grandmasters, 25 International Masters, 2 women Grandmasters. Nandita PV is one of them, as we'll see her game. And then we have this Grandmaster Roy Chaudhary, Saptarshi Roy Chaudhary, playing against Liange Dilshan of Sri Lanka. White seems to be preferable here, but there is some awkwardness in the pieces. Multiple captures are possible for black. So when there are multiple captures possible, like bishop into f3 and bishop into d2, both could be crucial moves in some positions. So let's move to the board 13 now. So a lot of things have taken place in this game. Benani opening. Well, it didn't start with Benani. It's a strange opening. Sobam Rauf of Egypt is playing against Grandmaster Marat Zumaev of Uzbekistan, and Sob Armau, I have not heard him or not seen his game, but surely if he has come for an international tournaments, we can say it's a good rating. And Zumaev, of course, a very strong Grandmaster, a member of Uzbekistan team for the Olympiads and Asian Team Championship, and a regular visitor of the Indian Grandmaster tournaments. He normally plays most of the Indian Grandmaster tournaments, and let's see how it goes. A very risky opening by Zumaev, and some great players do not consider this position to be playable after white plays d5, and it's opening which is very cramped. The very famous games by Karpov, of course. Karpov has played very well in this, but many other players, Boleslavsky contributed a lot to this. And after d5, it's not easy for black to sort of equalize, because there's less space, and when there is less space, we need to, of course, we have to create space, or we have to exchange pieces. When you have less space, what's the disadvantage? Lesser board room, as they call it as well, the less room on the board for you. And when you have less room, you're cramped. It means your pieces are not likely to come out soon. When your pieces cannot come out soon, how would they reach enemy king? So as you can see, the white pawns will be the barricade for the black pieces who can't get into the white territory at all. While this barricade doesn't prevent white pieces could go and hit at the king. So when you give space, you're considering something important. So c4. According to Boleslavsky and Smyslov, Karpov and Ivanchuk, knight c3 is a stronger move here than c4, because a square c4 can be used for the white knight. A standard plan here is to play knight c3, followed by knight f3, knight d2, and knight c4. And after c4, it becomes a regular opening now. g6. Now it's f4, a 4-pawn attack. So I think we are going to have a 4-pawn attack King's Indian regular variation if black takes and plays knight f6. So black is trying to get some advantage of the fact that knight is still on g8. And black is looking for possibilities where black can make better use of the g8 knight and than f6. But in my opinion, knight f6 would still be the best square anyway, so white is preferable here, and lot of dangerous threats after black develops knight to f6. Bishop d3, castle, castle. So white eventually wants to play knight c3 and e4, e5 if white can do it without losing the d5 pawn. And there comes c4, a typical Zumaev style move. He wants to gain quickly the initiative, and he also wants to give the c4 pawn, take the e4 pawn. Losing the e4 pawn would be a blow to white, so bishop c2 must be tried. And now let's see what black has on mind. Is it queen b6 check followed by knight g4, or is it just knight g4 threatening queen b6 check? But knight g4 looks artificial because there could be a5, but a check along the diagonal can be dangerous, followed by knight g4. Knight g4 would also attack the b2 point. That's the reason why queen b6 check and knight g4 could be a threat. But queen b6 check did make sense for sure. Knight c3 and knight d7. I think black is not in a hurry. Black doesn't want to play something quickly. Bishop on e3 in order to prevent knight c5. Black plays knight c5 now. White takes bishop into knight, and after bishop into knight, white has a enormous pawn structure and can't be really controlled by the enemy pieces. So queen c7 is standard Benoni, and bishop d4 and knight c5. So a dangerous move because white can advance the pawn to e5 now, and e5 played, and if black has to play d into e5, the position would be completely lost. So black goes knight g4. The e5 pawn now has been attacked by as many as 5 pieces. The d6 pawn, the knight on g4, the bishop on g7, queen on c7 and rook on e8, all 5 attack the e5 pawn. E5 pawn is guarded only thrice, f4 and bishop d4, knight f3, which means that white may have to exchange this. But after pawn into pawn, and if white really goes for bishop into g7 and queen d4 check, eventually the black knight will come to e3, and that's a dangerous factor. So bishop into g7, king into g7, queen d4 check, king moves to g8 as a logical move, and somehow the absence of pawn on e4 or e5 is not getting a good position. So queen d4 check, and white is, black cannot play queen f6 because the c5 knight is hanging, and black shouldn't play knight f6 because it's a well-placed piece at the moment. Moving the king, white has option of rook e1, which prevents knight e3, and then white will try to take the c4 pawn at leisure, rook e1, knight e5. That looks like more or less a standard plan for white, and queen d4 check, and black is thinking here. Zuma is confused. Look at the time. The Egyptian has taken almost 1 hour and 10 minutes, and Marat has taken only 25 minutes. Let's look at 14th game now. So 14th game, yes, yet another Sicilian and a Roser attack. Grandmaster Nguyen is playing against Aditya Krishna. So we'd already seen this opening. It's a classical Sicilian, and which can be made with Suzin attack or Roser attack or Opensky variation, Boleslavsky variations, and there's Kasparov variation, Karpov way of playing, Anand variation. A lot of variations in the Sicilian in different types, but in classical, in neither of we have a lot of options. In classical, we have mainly with the Boleslavsky setup, Richard setup, and the Suzin setup. Subsequently, there's the English attack, which also comes. Bishop g5, Roger. I think we saw another game where the same opening was played, queen d2. Black white castles long quickly and starts putting bishop d7, exactly the same position as the other game, f4. f4 was not played there. f4 is a standard move played for over 7 decades in the Sometimes people play f3, which is not all that common, which is called English attack. f4 plans to move the pawn to e5 quickly. White now brings back the knight. Not an ambitious opening, this one, and knight f3 as a Grandmaster world champion Mikhail Botvinnik showed, black can get b5 and e5, b4, and after pawn into f6 taking on c3, it leads to equal position. This is a well-known position where black equalizes with b5 and followed by immediate b4, b5 played and bishop d3 now. So the e4 pawn could have been hanging after b4, so bishop d3 and knight b4, and now e5. Opening of the position can be good only if there's something concrete happening, which may be possible, but knight into d3 check is a possibility though. D into f5 first and pawn, knight into e5. So instead of taking the pawn, the knight has taken this, questioning the presence of the bishop on d7, and the pawn on f4 is a weak pawn, and the advance cannot be justified once you don't have a pawn on e4. But there are queenside weaknesses for black, and it's possible for white to target them. So bishop c6, knight into 6, knight into bishop has been given, and now white should open up the game with f5, queen e3, okay, queen c8 and f5. Black has a dangerous situation here, h6, bishop h4, b4 drives away the knight, and now comes bishop into f6 followed by knight e4, knight threatens a check on d6, so bishop. And now white probably has a strong move, bishop c4, with bishop c4, knight a5, so not all that effective. If black can play bishop c4, white can play bishop c4 and f into e6, black would be in a bad way. And for bishop c4, black cannot take on f5 because of knight d6 check. Bishop c4 looks like a strong move anyway for knight a5 or knight e5. I just go queen bishop to b3. King b1, a safe move. And if black castles, white gets f6. And if black plays pawn into pawn, white gets knight d6 check. So what does black do now? Black has no useful move here. I think it was a risky way at this stage to start with knight b4. Perhaps other quieter moves could have been good. b4 itself looked like a fine move, and then knight b4 looks like a very strange move, because you are encouraging an attack which is on the right strategic attacking plan. We are just helping our opponent play that. So king b1, and we have an interesting position. Then let's come to the 15 board. There are 15 DG boards, and we'll be able to see 15 games continuously, non-stop. And here we have game between Rajesh Nayak and Obidi Arya from Iran, and Nayak Rajesh is from India. So this game has begun with Sicilian defense, many Sicilian defense. I think 4 games are Sicilian defense today. And this is the Najdorf variation, one of the most popular ways of playing Sicilian. Bishop c4, the Sozin variation, which has been played for the first time in this opening, in this tournament. e6, a4. A strange move, I think, confusing one idea with other. This move doesn't make any sense. It's not in the spirit of this particular opening, and is not going to be very productive. So let's quickly look at queen c7, queen e2, bishop e7, short castle, king h1. White wants to play f4, but knight c6, b6 was also possibility, but if knight c6 is more logical, bishop e3 and knight a5 attacking the bishop, bishop goes to d3. And is black ready to develop the queen side? Yes, black plays e5. Now black is ready to develop the queen side. Bishop e6 looks like a possibility here. Yes, knight d2 in order to control the c4 square as much as one can. Is the d5 possible here? If d5 is possible, then the position could be good. But as you can see, d5 pawn into d5, knight into d5, knight into d5, bishop into d5. White may get bishop into h7 check and king into h7, queen d3 check, picking up the d5 bishop, which means that black has a weak king and black loses a pawn. So d5 cannot be played, and white has played knight d2. White wants to slowly play on the white square, drive away the knight and then put knight on c4 yourself, put knight on b6 as a plan. So very interesting, but we have a very interesting phase of the round, and let's have a break for about half an hour here. I'll see you after half an hour, and here we have the 15th round game. On the top board we have Dipan Chakravarti playing against the overnight leader Alexei Fedorov, who is the only player with 5.5 points out of. So the game has already ended in a draw. So perhaps looks like a simple opening b5 and h3, h4. White has made a fundamental mistake of allowing h4. So white has planned something very concrete, and that concrete seems to be, I don't know if black should have played rook b8 trying to play for a win, but here rook d1 and rook c8 and a3 to stop b4, and black plays b4 anyway. So a lot of counter attack now, and looks like a theoretical variation where white can make a attack the queen with bishop a7. Queen a8 is a possibility though, but black goes queen c7 and white goes bishop b6 back, and queen b8 and bishop a7, queen c7, bishop b6. The position has been repeated several times, and the draw was agreed to, and we'll move to board 2, and then please watch this screen and I'll join the commentary. I'll restart the commentary after approximately half an hour. So you can watch this moves of this game here meanwhile. See you in half an hour. So welcome back after a break to the 7th round of the second Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament 2024. We're seeing the top board game between Fedorov and Dipan Chakravarti. Dipan Chakravarti white and Fedorov black had ended in a draw. And then we come to the second board game between Tabaz Arsh of Iran and Boris Savchenko of Russia. We had left at this stage where it was a very early opening and the c5 and d4 standard way of playing. A logical move for black could be knight e4 here or a pawn into pawn. Yes, knight into pawn and now d5. Knight e4 would have been a trickier move, but it might have resulted into queen c2 followed by the exchange of black color bishop, which black didn't want to do. So black takes here pawn into pawn, and for knight into pawn black plays d5, striving at equalizing in the center immediately. White has the option of bishop f3, but then black could come up with e5 perhaps, and e4 weakening option but also a possibility. And let's see, knight bd2, a simple option, and e6. So black is not hurrying with e5 because knight f3 would attack the pawn twice and it's a bit complex. Rook c1. Presuming that the file is going to be opened, and obviously it cannot be, the black cannot stop the opening of this c file. So white puts the rook in center in the c file in advance, so that when the file opens up, he has better control on the file. Rook e8. Black finally plans to go for e5, which could still be very weakening, and white creates a square for knight on the queen side so that the play can go along on the queen side, but goes knight f3. So b4 perhaps does not have much logic. The e5 point has been attacked. Knight c6 looks like a possibility, but one has to calculate b5, and after pawn into pawn and pawn into pawn, the e5 pawn could hang. In return, the a2 pawn is hanging, so knight c6 would be a risky option. Knight bd7 a safe option. d5 point is very safe, and after pawn into pawn, knight into pawn, knight c4, one needs to see if there is any tactical continuation possible. Knight could go to c4 or e4. After cd5, knight d5, black may plan to play f5 and e4. The weakness the cause thereby could be serious, but if black has protected all the weaknesses, black could really gain space. So it's not going to be a easy decision for white to play here. After knight to e4 looks better than knight to e4, but again it doesn't threaten anything, and the b4 pawn has to be guarded in other lines. Knight c4, you can't play knight into b4 because knight d6. So if you're not threatening knight d6, then you need to guard the b pawn. I think threatening knight d6 looks like a option. Knight e4 walks into knight into e3, opening up the bishop against the knight. So knight e4, knight into e3, pawn into e3, bishop into e4, and then white has knight g5 and queen into g5. So you could see that knight e4 doesn't really work. At the moment, white can also wait and prepare for knight e4 or knight c4, and knight c4 looks logical. Queen b3, okay, a deep move comparatively. Now he prepares also for knight e4. Because knight e4 is more productive in the sense that the other knight could go to g5. When white gets knight on e4 and knight on g5, the other knight on g5, black's position is going to collapse. Already there seems to be some real confusion in black's camp, because black has no counterplay and black is guarding quite a few weaknesses. White plans to play rook d1, and there could be a lot of pressure in the d file. The knight on d5 is too susceptible to attack by any side, and it's a vulnerable piece. After rook d1, the knight could get multiply attacked, and moving the knight could expose the queen at d8 or the f7 point. Black seems to be in a bad way here. Queen b3. Players have consumed a lot of time, I must say, though game is only 15 more games. That is what happens when you are well prepared otherwise, and if you get a position which is not known to you. Both the players walked into a territory they didn't know, and now you see the limitations are now very clear. It is a sort of opening where the Indian players like Nihal Sarin or Pragnanand could really play well. The great asset of Indian juniors is that unknown positions also, in unknown positions also they play as good as they play in the known positions, and they are able to judge the positions very well, and that may not be an easy case. So I think black is in a bad way. Black has only 10 minutes left. White also has 37 minutes, and I had missed this move queen b3, but it's stronger than the move I suggested, knight c4. Knight e4 in essence was right, but it had a tactical refutation of knight into e3. So now that has been taken care of, and now knight e4, rook fd1, they become serious threat. Knight on d5 is subject to attack, and perhaps moving the knight to d5 is a way, but knight has no good square. White could get bishop c4 then, and lot of attack is now going to come. Black is in a bad way. Let's move to the board 2, board 3 then, where the top seed Grandmaster Inyan plays against Nitin. Both of them are for Chennai. So very different treatment of the King's Indian defense was there. Nitin played the King's Indian in a very different manner, giving quite a few tempos. White seems to be very comfortable here, and the white position seems to be good. White has chances of even advancing the g pawn, but one has to be careful because the f pawn would be weak. White knight c3 is comparatively badly placed, and I don't see a need of white rook on d1. Actually, that rook de1 could be a good move in preparing for something like f5, exposing the enemy king and creating a square for the knight at d5 and at f4. Surely would be giving a e5 square also, so f5 has to be played only when it's possible. King h1, okay, but surely the the d1 rook has to be moved to e1, rook d2. So doubling in d file when there's a pawn on c7, which means that white is going for e5 break, and e5 break is a possibility which is of course a direct threat here. But why wasn't e5 possible here or the previous move? So e5, if bishop into bishop, then pawn into knight, that's the option. And if e5, knight moves and b7 bishop is hanging. So what happens to, so black plays a dubious move b6, white plays bishop f3, threatening e5, black plays bishop b7. So let's analyze the move e5, attacking the b7 bishop, bishop into f3, e into f6, equal exchange, bishop into d1, black has taken a rook, white takes f into e7, white wins the queen, black takes bishop into c2, and white take e into f8, which means that equal exchanges take place. e5 is not a threat. White loses a pawn in the entire calculation of e5, bishop f3, ef6, equal places gone, bd1, black has won a rook, fe7, white has won a queen for a rook, bishop into c2, white is a rook up, white is a rook down, and white plays ef8, and black takes on f8. White has regained the rook, so both the sides have lost a queen, a rook, and one minor piece, but white has lost one pawn more, the e pawn. So it doesn't make sense to initiate such a complex exchange which would lead to loss of material. So goes king h1, and black still plays rook a8, because again the move e5 would meet the same fate. And now rook d2, the deadly threat of e5, rook e1 also would have threatened e5. So rook d2, the threat is now e5, and if bishop into f3, e into f6, winning a piece, which means that black will support the b7 bishop, and bishop a8 looks like a possibility. It could be logical for white to play queen a4 or such moves, then knight e8, moving the knight itself. Moving the knight itself actually sort of casts doubts against white's pawn plan of doubling the d line. Now, if that the rook been on e1, white could have actually launched f5. f5, one has to be careful of knight e5 tempo and how good f into e6 capture is. I think a wise move generally could be b3, though it weakens the knight, but it would keep an option of c4 pawn. It takes away the option of c4 pawn being hanging after the black knight lands at e5. What to do with the h3 knight? It's a great piece guarding f4, so one point plan could be to exchange bishop d4, but after the bishops are exchanged, black gets e5, and black is a permanent powerful knight at e5 square. So again, complex line b4. White wants to play for c5 break. It's not easy. Possibility b3 was a safer option for sure. Black goes c5. So b4, a weakening move. Indian has chosen, and black has played c5. Again, e5 is no longer possible. Pawn into pawn, knight into pawn. So you can see a powerful knight at c5, a weak white pawn on c4, rook c8 is a logical move. Perhaps there is a threat of bishop into c3 and knight into e4. White has to guard the e4, knight e4. Okay, since the c5 knight is strong, white wants to exchange this knight, and queen c7 looks like a possibility here. But queen is guarding e6 point, so queen c7 could have some problems with knight g5. Knight into knight, okay, it exposes the very purpose of knight on c5 was to shield the b6 pawn from the attack by e3 bishop, and now that's gone. So b6 pawn is I think under attack, and rook b1, there could be a second attack against this, and black goes e5. So black has given up a pawn, and what does black have in return? Does black have anything in return? Because the knight on c5 was the pride of black's position, and to exchange it voluntarily without allowing a pawn, so it's now a vague move. If this move gets enough attack, fine, otherwise bishop into b6, entirely bishop into b6 attacking the rook is possible, and a pawn has been lost for sure. White is ready to get c5, so this was a necessary move, otherwise c5 was strong. Rook had to be moved, and if rook moved to other square, c5 could come. Black is threatening to recover the pawn by capturing on f4. White has, I think, different options here. Pawn into e5, bishop into e4 due to the f1 hanging position of f1 rook. I think rook d2 is a very sort of questionable decision, and although black has lost a pawn, black has some counterplay because of the threats due to the hanging position of e1 f1 rook, which means that on f into e4 even a vague move like bishop into e4 is possible. Not concrete moves are not required at this stage in white's position. With rook on d1, I think this position was better for white, much better, and there would be a possibility of f5 itself. So c5, he still plays it. Oh, sorry, I had missed pawn into pawn rook d7. So in that case, yes. So allowing bishop into b6 is a terrible move here. Then I think queen c7 was probably forced. Even losing a pawn on b6 was not all that bad. And if someone wanted to play e5 perhaps at this stage, but after giving away the powerful knight and bringing the queen to a powerful square, the b6 pawn is no longer defensible. Queen c7 would run into rook b1. So here e5 and the bishop into which and rook at c5 anyway. It's pawn takes pawn, rook d7. So black must play pawn takes pawn, rook d7. Yeah, and that piece is lost straight. So e into f4. C into d6, knight into d6. Is that knight stable there? Pawn into pawn, knight into pawn, e5. Bishop into e5. Pawn to the knight into e5. Let's see if there's a combination coming here. Queen a3 is a possibility for which black would probably guard with knight f5 and then queen into queen and rook d7. Yeah, queen a3, bishop e5 becomes necessary. Yeah, with guards, and then bishop c5, then rook d8, and if direct rook into d6, queen b3 check and e5, then black just moves the queen, supporting the bishop. At the moment nothing is hanging at the moment. Queen b4 instead of queen a3, bishop e5 is forced, bishop c5 probably now, and rook d8 is forced. Which rook? And then there will be third piece, so rook d8, rook c d8, and if rook d1 then rook f6, then look very healthy, a permanent pin, and some combinations to come. Black is down only to 7 minutes. Dubious King's Indian defense. Of course, there are confusing moves, but yeah, rook b d8, rook c d8 looks like a move. Rook c6 also perhaps, and yeah, rook c6 perhaps, and if rook double, then other rook to f6, and then this way you have a plan of getting out of the pin with queen c7. So maybe rook c6, but rook c6 also one has to be careful about. Suddenly bishop into d6, you are fine at the moment. So rook c6, and if rook d1, rook f6, and then there is a chance of moving the queen to c7 eventually. No combination is possible here. Let's see how the game goes. Yes, I think black has to look at a very accurate defense. I don't see a forced win for white after black plays rook c6 and rook f6. And there is no extra pawn as well here. So if rook c6, mainly it's not the pawns which are likely to die. Here is an exchange or a piece that could go. And rook c6, rook f6, if you have this strange strange piece position hanging on to everything, in that case black could be in a good position. So rook c6 or rook f6, I think better moves than other moves. Let's move to board 4 then. So here we have Nila, so I played a confusing opening. It was already short of time in the opening. Let's see how the game has gone. Okay. So e3 compared with lower option, black plays pawn into pawn, and a4 and a6. I'm not sure if a6 is the best move. White gets time to capture knight into pawn, f4. a5 was also a possibility. f4 perhaps not so logical. B c5, d into c5, knight into c5. What has white gained by playing f4? The hold on e5 is no longer there. This move has to be consistent. If you played f4, of course you have a logical plan of playing the cramping a5, and then black c8 bishop would have some problems. The c8 bishop, it's not easy to develop the c8 bishop. If I look logical move here, whereas f4 intends to play knight e5 and attack on the king side, rook f3, rook h3, bishop d3, but black opens up. And if you really want to justify f4, the right move would be knight to e5, or just leave as is, pawn into pawn, then take the pawn, and that would be all right. Please pawn into pawn, knight into c5. Now one wonders why the pawn came to f4 at all. Queen c2, the bishop still has some problems. It's not easy to develop that piece anyway, but knight d5, knight into knight, pawn into knight. So black has created some possibilities. Rook d1, pinning the pawn, bishop e6, encouraging f5. What could be the reason for encouraging f5? f5 is perhaps a possibility. Black moves the queen and attacks the knight. Say f5, queen e7, and f into e6. Yeah, but something wrong. f5. Yes, f5 is possible, but queen h4, f5, queen h4, and g3, bishop into g3, pawn into g3, queen g3 check with a strong attack. So probably f5 doesn't work because of queen h4. There's too much weakness on the king side, no pieces to guard the king side. Now he realizes that the knight should have been on f3, and okay, e3 pawn has been made weak. b4 drives away the spaces, but it doesn't really bring relief. White is making, white is creating weaknesses with every move, and the bishop must remain on c1 to guard e3 for long. And knight f1 was for knight f3, okay, and well, I think if black starts attacking e3, is going to be tough. So queen f6, there is going to be knight d4 first. Knight f6 and knight e4 is also possible. Rook c8, always a tempo. So white is just being driven away without any real justification to those moves. Knight f6, the knight could go to e4, bishop could go to f5, then bishop d3. So to discuss queen moves, knight g4, immediate attack against the pawn. Rook e1. Quite a queen f6 looks like a logical move here. Then bishop f5 to come queen f6, yes, and rook a3. And exchanging of light bishops is also a good plan. Bishop f5, but at the moment bishop f5 has bishop into f5. So how does one get that? g6 to, and is the f4 pawn hanging? Yes, I missed this move. Went into f4. So black is winning here. So yes, I think a strange way of playing f4 followed by d into c5. The moves, two moves which have no connection with each other. f4. Yes, here you have a standard position where you don't play f4. You could even try to play with e4, which is logical as well. But a5 was a very good move, creating a permanent return. After f4, c5, yes, I think you play knight e5 or you play bishop f3, and for pawn into pawn, you take the pawn and then put knight on e5. That is a standard position. And after this, suddenly we see why the pawn came to f4 and why keep the queens then in bad position. And exchanging this was a further necessity, but the pawn comes and look at the e4 weakness. It's just a pathetic position. White just gains. The knight on c5 is coming in the way of bishop on a7. Black really wants to move that knight to attack e3 as well as to attack the queen with rook c8. And white plays a rook a3 at this stage was a sensible move, but b4, this so-called tempos are spoiling the position on every move. Knight f3 forced to save the pawn, rook c8, and again queen b1. So he wants to win a piece with f5. Your opponent doesn't allow you. Okay, if you play it this way, then at least play f5. Play some move f5 and then put in perhaps knight d4. So rook into c1 is not a threat. f5, bishop into f5 is also not a threat. So it was possible to play bishop d3 and knight g4. So e3 is attacked and rook e1, queen f6. Here I missed the threat of queen into f4. So, well, what should white be doing then? Queen f6. h3 looks like a forced move here. h3, rook into c1, and queen into c1, bishop into e3 check. Loses a pawn anyway. Rook into c1, queen into f4, so many threats. Bishop into h7 check makes no significant gain. Rook a3 and queen into f4. So e3 pawn is gone, but bishop into h7 check. At the moment e3 is guarded, so bishop c2. And now luckily white has stopped the threat of rook into c1, and though not attacking the queen. One possibility is queen h6 followed by d4. One possibility is, yeah, that looks like a sound option. It's difficult to believe that white can survive this. Queen c4, bishop attacked. In case of bishop d3, there is queen into c1 coming, okay. Bishop a4 to keep the e3 guarded, the only square. And what happens to d4? You take and you have d4 is a possibility. d4 and since e4 would be met with d3 check, so it seems that it's compulsory to take pawn into d4, bishop into d4 check, knight into d4, queen into d4 check, bishop e3, knight into e3, rook a into e3, and all is well apparently. Bishop on a4 is not well, but other things are okay. Say rook c4. Yeah, tough position. Certainly, attacking the queen is always option because what is attacked is only a pawn. So, but bishop b3 could run into queen into b4, attacking too many pieces. b3 bishop is pinned. e4 would run into d3 check and whatnot. So e3 is attacked. There's no other way of attacking the queen. Knight d2, knight g5, or one movement threat. Okay, f5. So the e3 pawn is now into serious trouble. So bishop b3, queen into b4, threatening queen into e1 mate. No time to capture on e6, and everything is attacked. Knight into e6, queen into e6, the e3 is multiply attacked 4 times and guarded. Thrice it could be guarded once again, but rook into c1 would be possible eventually. So e3 pawn is gone, e4 is met with again d3 check. So how does one prevent d into e3 or knight into e3? No way. I think black is winning here. So let's move. A nice game and very unscientific play by Nilesh. So we had left this game at g3. White has made an awkward setup. So after h5, the white setup becomes awkward, but white finds the correct plan g3. Black finds the correct way to progress b4 and then rook h2. Instead of putting bishop on g2 and rook to somewhere, white wants to put rook on h2. Where does the rook go hereafter? White wants to eventually release the queen. Say something like knight c1 would threaten queen into b4 if the rook was on h2. So there's rook h2, so a5, knight f4. So queen can now move because the hc2 has been guarded. Queen b7, intending a4, queen e1, a4, bishop c6. a4 looks logical. Rook d2, e5. So bishop into f6, knight d5 is a possibility now. And if bishop into f6, ef4, then bishop into g7, e5. Black is okay with whites taking bishop into f6 and black takes g into f6, that's okay. a4 and b3 is a plan, but she goes for e5. Bishop into knight, bishop into bishop, knight d5, bishop d8. So okay, knight on d5 remains there and black probably just wants to play. By knight e3, the pawn is attacked, castles, the pawn is abandoned, knight f5, pawn not taken, rook b8, rook to d6. So black has not played a4 and b3 so far, and white is going to quickly create attack against g7, g6, queen e3, a piece sacrifice, pawn into knight. So rook into d8, queen g5 check. Yes, what happens? The d8 doesn't go in check. So rook into d8, rook into d8, queen g5 check, king h7 then. And then h5 goes, f5 goes, but whether you actually get d8 by force then. Queen into h5 check, king g8, queen g5 check, king h7, queen into f5 check, king g7, still queen g5 check. Let's say rook into d8 seems to be working here. Rook d8, queen g5 check, king f8, then take on d8 check. So rook d8, perhaps queen g5 check first, or even sacrifice rook into d8 and then play queen g5 check. King goes to h file, you take queen into h5 check first. King goes to g7, you go queen g5 check. Black goes king to h8, then you take d8 with check. If black plays king h7, you take f5 with check, and you still pick up the rook with queen g5 check. So I think rook into d8 seems to win this game. Rook into d8, rook into d8, rook into d8, rook into d8, queen g5 check, or rook into d8, rook into d8, queen g5. I don't know. It's, why doesn't need so much time to calculate these variations? Let's move to the next game, but white is already a pawn up, winning 2 more pawns. I think 3 pawns up. So big advantage probably. So rook d8 seems to be winning here for white. Ameya Audi playing white against Ilam Parthi. Ilam Parthi had begun the game in somewhat unscientific way, and I believe that Ameya had a good advantage. But Ilam Parthi is playing complex line, trying to attack the queen. Black's king is weak, and only advantage is that white lost a couple of tempos. White had to play bishop d3 and bishop f5 to exchange a piece that had just moved. Queen into d6. Not capturing on c3 is, I think, a strange decision in my opinion, because it's better to have opponent have a bad pawn structure and long castle, and now white pawns cannot be doubled. Here it was very logical to play knight into c3, and if pawn into c3 then bishop into d6, and if bishop into c3 then exchange and play queen into d6. After the bishops are exchanged, there could also be a chance of rook h6 coming. Here queen into d6 and castles. Now g6, black has not attempted to weaken white's pawn structure, and white is now ready to attack. One idea could be moving the bishop right now, but bishop a5 can be met with queen c5. So other option is to attack the e5 point. Even b3 and bishop b2 looks like a good plan, because once white gets c4, it's the winning position. So b3, queen a3 check, then b2. So b3 and just go bishop b2 next, and if required, so b3, queen c5, bishop b2, knight b4, b3, queen c5, bishop e5 check. So b3 is, queen c5 is not possible. So b3 and bishop b2 looks like a very strong plan here, because then c4 would be a real threat, massive threat. Rook he1, f6, h3. White wants to play so safer with g4. I thought b3 was more logical. Now bishop d4. Yeah, bishop must be maintained on this diagonal, and now after this it's not possible. He wants to maintain, but now we have move knight b4 coming. What does he want to do for knight b4? Knight b4 attacks a2. What is the trap intended here for? Is there a multiple combination coming with multiple sacrifice on e5? Bishop into e5, pawn into e5, rook into e5 or something. And queen into e5, rook d7 check, king h6, no check. Yeah, so knight b4 is the obvious move and being considered probably, but knight b4, a3 is probably the reply after a3. There is no sack required, a3. So perhaps wait for a move and play queen f7 here. White goes bishop c5, but at least the attack against e5 is gone. White will have problems, black will have problems after white hits c4, bishop c5 and f4, bishop c5 and c4. Knight will have to go to f4. White has an advantage, but I think h3 and rook h1 may not be the best moves. let's look at the next game now. And we have Grandmaster Abdul Rahman Hesham of Egypt playing against Gautam Krishna. So knight b3, a decision that always compromises the pawn structure, and knight c5, rook a3, e5. Yeah, this we had seen e5, and it was not easy to find out what was the idea behind this, apart from posting a knight on d4, which hits nothing, and f4 and f5. So okay, so the rash wild game has now begun. One option could be bishop d3, and black wants to play queen b6 there, a into f5, bishop into f5, and probably now f into e5, d into e5 opens the knight against the queen against the queen. So I think knight d5 is probably a safe move. And this ef4, there is rook into f4, bishop f3, queen b6, king h1. I prefer to prevent knight d5, knight c2, knight d5, queen d4, knight e7 check, queen into queen, pawn into queen, rook attacked, knight into f5. Not awkward move like rook f5, knight into f5 offers an exchange or a trap rather, knight into a3, knight into d4, rook into f4, okay, knight into a3, knight into d4, rook into f4, rook d1, and black loses. So rook into f5, rook a4, b7 attacked, rook into f4 possible, rook d1 attacking b7, so rook b8 looks like a proper move. Rook e8 is a confusing option. Rook e8, bishop into b7. Whether black has enough initiative, don't think so. So rook b8 looks fine. Rook b8, and then move the knight to a better square. But yeah, it's thinking, so there has to be some tactical possibility which is probably analyzing. Bishop to permit bishop into b7 and then gain something else. But a move like rook f8 is possible, for example, and if h3 then rook f7, you have moved a rook to a better square than b8 and you guarded the pawn. So that could be one of the reasons to play. And now we go to board 8, or first international master of Assam, Sahil Day, plays against strategically powerful player Igor Glek, who is now playing for Belgium. And we had seen white trying to push on the queen side. So the e5 pawn must be made weak, and c5 break is something which one could try. c5 actually played, trying to win the e5 pawn, g4, reducing the pressure against the e5 point, pawn into pawn, queen into pawn. The knight is attacked and the d3 pawn is attacked. Knight g5, a committal move, but knight is not, because the knight could be trapped, but there is no way of trapping the knight. What does he do for bishop d5? He plays e4 and creates a square, and bishop d7 doesn't make sense as it is, queen b3 check. So I think the knight will not be trapped here. a6, so knight into e6, queen into e6, queen a5, rook e8, pawn defended, advance at the anti-flanker, over protection, a4. So b5 is not able, white is getting the queen bottled. Queen comes out, run away supporting the pawn, okay. Rook d8, rook d1. So white has been defending accurately, and now it's time for white to play b5 probably. Bishop a1, okay. Now e4. White is making very interesting pawn breaks. Black already has a lot of problems with the pawn structure, but black doesn't mind playing such position because there could be a chance of attack. Pawn into pawn, bishop h6 looks good. e4 has encouraged f4, and black will have an option of attacking against f2 or playing f3 at right moment, and the bishop will be in a bad position. One needs to be seen immediate attack in the center. What happens if black plays f3 and f3 bishop f1 threatens bishop c4 now because of d4. So f into g3, he wants to attack f2. F into g3 looks logical compared to h into g3. fg, and then perhaps queen g6 and bishop h6. The g4 square, which was a good outpost, good post for the knight, has been occupied by one's own pawn. So not much play. After fg3 and moves like rook f1 also come into picture. There is a weakness on f5 where white rook could get into. So after fg3 and rook f1 and rook f5, it seems that it's going to be tough for Blake. So we move to Vianney Antonio Di Cunha of Mangalore versus K. Ratnakaran of Kerala. Here they had a very weird opening, and black had started attacking against the king very soon in the game. White opens up the center because black has not castle, even knight d5 looks like a strong move. Knight d4 is a strong move. g4, he wants to open up the position. White may have to give up a pawn with h4, h into g4, and just takes the pawn. White is confident the black queen cannot come to the h file. We can see there are no squares itself, although it's illegal to get the queen in the h line. There are no squares where the queen is safe. So there's not going to be any threat. Black got knight on e5, that's the only compensation. Knight d5, b5. So weakening the grip on d5 helps. cb5 would run into knight into g4, and the d5 knight would be lost, or in the different order, bishop into d5 followed by knight into g4. So white is playing without the bishop and the rook. And if that is not proven serious, then black will be in a bad way. But black pieces has, I think, complete coordination. Bishop into d5. Rook c8 was a possibility. I'll be bishop into d5. So, rook c8 is controlled. So now he wants to play perhaps rook c8, knight into g4 and rook c8. Bishop f6, okay. Bishop b2 looks necessary. King f8. Bishop e2. Knight g6, rook h4. Risky move, a trap. If white wants to win a piece with f4, black wins with queen b6 check immediately. So white can never afford to move this f2 pawn now. And queen wants to come to h4. So moving the rook to f4 is the option, then comes queen g5. Yeah, rook could move to f4, queen could come to g5. Now queen d2 doesn't threaten rook into f7 check, so queen d2 is not a great option there. So g3. In order to meet queen h6 with rook h4, so black has an active position, but pawn down and inferior position. If white is able to move the f4 rook and get f4, it would be winning. As long as the queens are on the board, it's not possible to play f4. So perhaps rook c1 and such moves, penetration. I think attacking d6 is the right way for white. So white attacks d6, white will be in a powerful position. And we go to board 10. We had left this board at knight a5 and bishop c2, pawn into c3, pawn into c3, and now we have knight h5, d4. White finally gets d4, knight into g3, pawn h into g3, knight c6. Black's knight was at c6 for a long time, a5 for a long time, and black wants to bring it back into the game. But the knight may not be a very stable piece here. a5 is a irritating option as well here. Rook b1. a5 with the idea of bishop a4 did, it was a matter of concern. And now black would play a5 here probably. Queen f6, provoking knight d5. Very committal move. He wants to give c7 and take on d4, queen g7. The d4 can't be held now. It's attacked more number of times than defended, and the white rook is not in the position to guard it. So now it can't be guarded. Some other consideration has to be there. So what does white do? Pawn into pawn, knight into pawn seems to be quite good for black. Knight to c7, ed4 looks fine as well. D into e5, g4. I think giving the c7 pawn also worked, but okay, he wants to improve the piece position. Knight into knight and pawn into knight and d into e5. Attacking d4. Knight e7 check, knight c6 doesn't work as well. So how about c into d4, queen, d into e5, knight e7 check, king h8, and then d into e5, queen into e5, knight c6, queen c5, and take on a7, and then the whites get e5. I think it's possible to play cd4, d5, knight e7 check there, and then pawn into e5. And the knight c6 could be a dangerous threat. Yeah, it's not very comfortable for black, too many weaknesses. Kashish Jain in good form against the Sri Lankan international master De Silva, who has just won the under 18 Asian Championship. And now we move to board 11. Ayush Sharma versus Sudarshan Bhatt. So move rook e8 was played here, a move which did not have any plans, and as a result he will be a tempo down in most of the variations because rook e8 does not make sense, and f4 and b5 and e5. So f7 is weak, so knight into b3 is forced, and pawn into b3, b5 is also now hanging. So b plays b4. Knight a4, we are analyzing here, the queen f2 would suddenly come after the exchange, so knight d5. Doesn't want to take the pawn, so knight goes to c6 and queen into d5. That's what we were analyzing. Queen into d5, bishop b7, and ed6, then perhaps queen c6, ed6, also ed6, knight e7 check and queen d6, loses a piece to queen into d6 and rook into e3, bishop b6 and queen c6, knight e7 check, queen e7 doesn't help at all. So, well, then what could move the queen, and white has won a piece, but apparently no threats. So what happens to e6? Threatening e into f7 check, which forces f6 or f5. Yeah, after the f5, the pawn on e6 could become weak as well. So it seems that he's going to win a piece. So white goes for the exchange, bishop into c6, knight into a8. I think he remains a exchange up. So rook d8, guarding the, so making, because knight into d8 is not possible, so this move is there. c6 is under attack and can't be guarded. So again knight e7 check is unplayable because queen e7 in the, so c6 goes for sure, and after c6 goes, what does it lead to? Knight c4, there's an additional threat of d into e5 now, so white goes e6 and provokes e5. So c6 is going to be lost. White will have equal number of pawns. a6 is something white has to try to gain. I'm not looking for a sacrifice here. Knight into d8 is only, it's considering that it's won a piece. Knight into d8, bishop into d5, knight into d5 would be very good, but there is queen into d8, and here we have rook and a piece, rook into a6. Yeah, so indeed, and in d8, bd5 only move, and then knight d5, queen attacked. So queen has no way of attacking the d5 knight, so queen takes on d8, and white takes rook into a6. A rook and the bishop and rook and the knight and the pawn, and the a7 is a target. So possible queen sacrifice. c4. Allowing bishop into c6. It's pole to pole. There is a way supporting c3. And a move like bishop b7 now. Rook b8. Rook into a6. Bishop b5. Knight d5 doesn't really help because two rooks are attacked. Queen d8, so one rook is lost. Now b3 pawn also is lost thereafter. Rook a7, so bishop into f1. And how strong is the attack? Exchange is lost for sure. Bishop into f1 and rook into b3 also. So which means that no pawns for exchange, 5 pawns each. But knight on d5, giant and the rook on e8 and bishop on g7 are rendered hopeless. So perhaps white can just concentrate on e7. So bishop f1 takes on f1, and then simply rook d7 and take on e7. Lot of compensation because the e6 pawn has really created a barricade between black's forces. Black spaces cannot be transported from one side to other side. Bishop into f1 is absolutely forced, otherwise c4 some more automatically wins. So after force bishop into f1, king into f1, rook into b3, rook d7 looks extremely difficult for. But there is queen b8 and rook b1 check. There are no rooks. We will have a very complex struggle still left here. Saptarshi Roy Chaudhary plays against Liange Dilshan of Sri Lanka. Yes, and at this stage we saw that black, by exchanging both the pieces, could create some counterplay. Bishop b1, d5. So white has initiated some attack. White has sacrificed, planning to open up, keeping a possibility of bishop into f6 at right moment, and if needed to attack h7, bishop into f6 could be a possibility. Knight e4. ed5 looks like a forced move anyway. Excuse me for a minute. So e5, bishop into f6, queen into f6. Black pieces are just very powerfully placed. C into d5. So all captures seem to be good. Taking on c1 looks like the most accurate one, because then you must take with the queen and black captures, and then you have of course a tempo with queen c2, but queen into d5 is also possible, because if bishop into f6, gf6, the white knights are very badly placed and the weakness on the king side is not very relevant. Knight into d5 also is possible, maintaining good pawn structure. There is no direct attack coming against that 7 point. So a free pawn and no realistic threat. Rook c8 followed by knight e4 looks like the only way. Rook c8 and knight must move towards the king side. So knight e4, queen a4. The move doesn't really threaten much, but keeps the option of queen e4 and queen d4. There will be a couple of mate threats. Queen c6, queen d4 a checkmate threat, queen h6. So black has won a pawn and black has guarded himself. If the d5 pawn, if in d5 knight is not hanging, then black is ready to play knight c6 also. And all pieces will be active. Knight e4, white tries to do something quickly. Knight c7. So planning to bring the other knight, one knight to e6, one knight to c6, everything g3. The bishop has no square. So knight e6 tempo, and bishop plans to go to b8, queen d7. That bishop is not attacked, so bishop b8 followed by bishop c6. Bishop b8, planning bishop c6, bishop c1. So queen moves to h5 with a tempo. Knight attacked with queen h5, queen h3. Oh, hoping for knight g5, knight into g5. But I thought queen h3 looks really strong. But even queen h5, what did he have on mind for queen h5? No threats really. The f3 knight would be attacked. But queen h3 prevents knight g5, because any knight g5, black takes knight into g5 and the queen on d7 is attacked. Black, as it is, black threatens strange moves like knight g5 or knight f4 perhaps. No, not yet, but queen e7. So creating some possibilities like knight f6 check, pawn into knight, queen into pawn, but bishop is now on c1. Bishop is no longer on b2. Knight g5 could be applied. I don't know why black did not play queen h5 actually, but fine as well. The bishop c6 tempo has been at least saved. Bishop into e4 would give some compensation, because the bishops are strong in this position. So bishop must move to a safer square, bishop c6. Now black wants to bring in knight with knight c4. And now let us see if the f8 rook can be made awkward. Knight rook e8, there may be a possibility of queen f7 check, but yeah, so what happens to bishop a3 and rook e8, queen f7 check, king into f7, knight g5 check, knight into knight check, king f6, black wins. So rook e8 is a threat perhaps. Bishop b2 prevents rook e8 because of knight f6 check. So bishop b2, knight c4 is an irritating move, and then bishop into g. A lot of tactical possibilities are there. Black has put queen on h3 in an awkward square, and there could be some threats. White is looking for a combination, because it is white's absolute need to do something. Knight g5 has been permitted again. Knight g5 wins the h7 pawn. So why knight g? What does he plan for knight eg5, which attacks h7 point, and also attacks subsequently, it will attack. Yeah, but knight g5, bishop into g5, you can't take the other knight into g5 because queen g2 mate. So if you play knight f g5, knight g5, you have to take with the bishop, which is again contrary to the idea of attacking h7. So, well, black has at the moment survived the scare, immediate, because of the g2 weakness, immediate knight g5 is not working. Let's come to knight f g5 again, and knight into g5, queen into g5, threatening knight f6 check, but then queen into g5, okay, even up, and with bb2 to come. I think that still looks like the only option to play knight fg5. Yeah, but so sharp game, and compared to the position where Saptarshi Raj Chaudhary had given up a pawn, this is a much more reasonable position to play, because there are some threats, and although black will have a defense, so not a very great. Let's now look at the game between Shob Amrof of Egypt playing against Zumaev Marat of Uzbekistan, one of the common visitors of India, who's played most of the Indian Grandmaster tournaments, more than any other Indian Grandmaster. So h3, black played a risky move, knight e3, but this has been well calculated. White plays a tricky move, rook e1. So black takes knight into c2, there is rook into e8 mate, the e8 rook is hanging, so black trades the knight for the bishop or the bishop for the bishop. It would be bad for white to take bishop into f5 here. This is one possibility of knight into f1 as well. So rook into e3, bishop into c2, and after the rook exchange, c4 pawn cannot be taken because of bishop d3. So rook e1. So for the first time he wants to take on c4 now. Rook into e3, rook into e3, and if bishop d3, then knight e5. So knight into a4. Both the sides take a pawn. Knight into a4, bishop into a4, knight e5. The major threat is knight g4, the dangerous attack. So queen f6, pinning the knight, and queen f6. We have now d pawn ruling as well, or taking on c4. Yeah, so d pawn ruling is also possible. Bishop goes to b5. It's not easy. Queen c7 would allow queen into f4, then rook f3, and queen d4 check. One option is to play queen d4 back, but then the threat of knight g4 is gone, and rook d8 is a possibility. Queen c7, indeed played, giving up the f4 pawn, rook f3, and then queen d4 check, and then king moves. The f7 pawn is under trouble. Queen into d5. Let's see, rook d8. So now d6, there will be rook into d6, and he is permitting knight into f7 as a combination. Knight into f7, rook d7, knight into f7, rook d7, knight h6 check, king g7, and the knight is lost. Rook d7, knight h6, rook d7, queen e5, queen into f7, rook d7, knight h6 check, king g7, queen e5, queen into queen. Let's see what's happening. Rook d7, knight h6 check, king g7, knight f5 check. So he lost a piece this way. Knight into f7. What a combination. It's quite obvious to see that the knight is trapped, the queen is attacked, knight f5 check. So both options are good. Queen into f5, rook e7 check. So simplifies the moves and becomes a easy victory now. Black is ready for queen e7 or bishop c4, king h2, bishop c4, d6, queen e6 is one possibility, h5, king g3, and now queen e7. White may resign the game here. That's king h2. White is safe, but white is a piece down. No compensation. So, okay, let's move to board 14 now. Yes, we had a wild position here. Aditya Krishna had a very riskily placed king, and at this stage king f8 had to be played because pawn into pawn could be met with knight d6 check. We had left at this stage king f8, probably a first move, g4 and h5, knight comes to g5, h into g4, so f into e6 or knight into f7, sorry, f into e6, bishop into g5, queen into g5, queen into e6. Too many white rooks coming to join this. I think queen c 5 check is also dangerous. Rook e1 is a rook d e1, queen c5 check first. And where does the black king go? If king g8, there could be bishop c4 or bishop f5 attacking the knight. Knight goes to e7, and now we are in a pin. Rook d e1, rook h e1. Rook d e1 looks more natural, and runaway queen supporting. But rook d e1, probably black plans to play rook into h2, and then we could play rook h f1. It looked like a nice way of playing. Rook d e1 and rook into h2, then rook h f1 attacking the, but probably rook d1, queen d7. So he doesn't want the queen to go to d7. Queen must go to f6 now. And now, how quickly does one attack the e7 point? Rook e2, oh, slow. Well, simple move, planning to double. Rook e8, bishop into a6, bb5, rook e1, g6, bb5. Was rook e1 first? Rook c8 forced here, probably. Rook c8. Yeah, forced move. Queen takes on b4. Still not possible to get out of the pin. And if rook c7, then rook d e1, and again not possible to get out of the pin. So he doesn't bother, he doesn't try to get out of the pin. He wants to just protect that. So rook e1 and rook c5. Probably a4 should decide the game. a4, rook e5. The only chance exchanging all the rooks could gain some, but I think taking both the rooks and queen d2 paves way for advance of the a pawn while guarding queen into g4. Okay, simply takes, not in a hurry to simplify. So several pawns up now, and Nguyen is completely winning. Queen e2, yes, and perhaps king a2 or something, and c3, a5 straight. Okay, and this allows queen g1 check because it doesn't plan anything. No threats. White is just going to play a6 and perhaps queen c4. And yeah. So black is in a bad way, and the 0.00 shows that perhaps black has resigned. We go to the game 15 here. So game between Rajesh Nayak and Umdi Arya of Iran. Rajesh Nayak is from India. So Sicilian Najdorf, one of the most difficult openings to play. Bishop c4, e6, a4. When I made my first Grandmaster norm, I played 6 to a4, not bishop c4. So a4, that's also variation which aims against Najdorf variation, and it could become more or less like a classical variation. But here Bishop on c4 is a awkward piece. So white goes for short castle and bishop, black's logical plan would be to quickly play b6 and bb7. White's plan would be to play f4 and f5, knight c6. This move was good even before queen c7, and now knight a5. Taking the knight was as good. Bishop d3 and e5. Okay, they have completely different handling of this position. If black gets d5 break at right moment, black would be good. Bishop d3 and queen e2 are contrary to the other piece position. The knight b3 probably is more accurate. Knight f3. And black is now ready for d5. It's also ready for knight c4. So knight d2. And how easy is equality after d5? I think black is doing well, but rook c8. Okay, f4. Pawn into pawn, rook into pawn. Knight c6, knight comes to e5, but at least white got a desirable position. The important point is d5 possible here? Because of the queen d3 check, it looks difficult. d5, ad5, knight into d5, knight into d5, bishop into d5, bishop into h7 check, king into h7, queen d3 check, king g8, queen into d5, and rook d8 followed by queen into c2. I thought it was queen e4. Okay, so there are problems in d5, and perhaps rook d8 was a more logical move, trying to play d5. And now pawn into pawn, rook into pawn. So black could occupy knight c4, but the position remains still little difficult after knight into c4, bishop d4. So knight c6 back and knight c4. Probably a big concession, bishop into c4. If you play knight e5 straight needs to be played. Knight b4. Okay, encouraging knight b6. Okay, knight e5 look like a more straightforward move. Knight b4, knight b6. Actually, black gained nothing by rook ac8, but still it's not great because d5 square is well covered, and rook e8. Okay, so black is planning to play d5. Rook f1. Is d5 possible here? d5, pawn into pawn, knight into pawn, both knights get exchanged. And again bishop h7 check and queen h5 check. After queen into d5 there's bishop d6. So knight d7, knight into d7, queen into d7. Now black bishop is ready to come to e5, so white may have to sacrifice when black plays bishop f6. So queen h5, so e5 is a threat now. Knight into d3 will have to be captured, followed by d5. Knight into d3, pawn into d3, d5 looks like a possibility, but pawn into pawn. The bishop is trapped, otherwise it could be a good positional gambit. So direct knight into 3, cd3, bishop f6 is risky because of rook into f6. So tactical reasons make it difficult to play the fundamentally accurate moves. Queen d8. So for e5 he wants to play cold-bloodedly g6. Or knight into d3 rather. So rook f3, knight c6. So e5 g6. The weakness is not serious. Okay. Rook g3. Knight e5. Is a combination coming? No. Knight d5, bishop, knight g6. But now white has a very strong position, I think. Rook f5. Bishop h4. And what does he do for rook h3? bishop into f5, e into f5. Back rank combination is queen g5 possible here, queen g5, queen f3, rook e5, pinning the knight. So unattacking the knight, so fg6 ruled out, and yeah, very interesting tactical battle. Then there's a back rank mate as well against white. White has sacrificed an exchange. White needs to move the queen, and that attacks the knight. So queen moves here. What happens? Queen f3, threatening pawn into g6, or perhaps queen f3 may not threaten pawn into g6 because fg, and you have the f8 rook coming, opening up. A very wild play. I'm sure White has, when White intended the sacrifice, when White initiated the sacrifice, he has not seen so many complications taking place. Knight e7, so rook into h4 and rook into h7, f6 here, knight into d5, f6, knight into d5, bishop h7 check, king h7, rook h4 check, king g8, queen h3. What happens to f6? f6, if knight into d5, then you have bishop into h7 check, king into h7, rook h4 check, and queen h3. So f6 played, okay, and now knight d5 ruled out because of bishop h7 check and rook h4 check and queen h3. So knight g6 is now compulsory, and bishop into g6 and rook into h4. So, well, black is in trouble, and very strange move. Knight e7. It is possible to play rook into d5 at that stage. It was possible to, rook into d5, knight e5 would have led to a comfortable equality at least, or it is possible to leave the knight on g6. Knight e6, I think, allows this brilliant combination f6. And now the h4 bishop is attacked, the e7 knight is attacked, and to prevent mate, one may have to play knight g6, which means simply bishop into g6 and rook into h4. Still black gets g into f6, so there are two pieces for a rook, but there's one pawn. So again, battle is not yet lost. And then let's go back to board 2 now. Board 1 had ended in a draw, and once we have a look at this, we'll stop this coverage. Well, the commentary for this game, yes, we had left this position where we left it at a very interesting phase, and white had played queen b3, which looked like a strong move. And let's see how black guarded this b5. So somewhere that knight e4 or knight c4, knight e4 was not working, knight c4 might have helped, because black would have to defend the d6 point. Now knight e4, and now the d7 knight or the d5 knight moves to. So knight d6, there's bishop d5, knight c3 and e4, knight d2, h5. So black's colored bishops are getting exchanged, but the white is a pawn down, and the e4 pawn is not easily recoverable. Knight is a good blockader, but not with all those weaknesses, and the passed pawn is strong. It gets back the pawn, but queen h4, h3 takes the pawn on b4 with the queen, and queen into a6 is not possible. So queen into queen, rook into queen, a solid pawn down with no apparent compensation unless the pawn is attacked immediately. Rook c3 and rook d8 probably, and knight f1. Does knight f1 win the pawn? Knight f1, bishop e4, f3. So knight f1, if it wins the pawn, there are reasonable chances of a draw after, even though black is better after knight b3. Stopping a5, okay, and stopping a5 and intends to. So what does black do now? Black doubles, white would take on d3 then, If the bishop and knight get exchanged, then it will be a draw, and d3 pawn is lost. But does black have a chance of exchanging a rook, giving up the d3 pawn, but advance the a pawn to a5? Once the a5 and a4 comes, rook b5 here, take on d3, take on d3, take on d3, bishop e4, the rook d4. Yeah, it's not easy for white to start advancing the pawn. Rook d4. Yeah, but rook b5 is also a possibility of knight d4. And bishop e4, f3, there's no good square for the bishop. Bishop e4, f3, bishop f5, e4, and the pawn on bishop e6, knight c5. Looks like white will have adequate play to counter the black pawns, two passed pawns, but out of which only one is going to survive. And we see we have a complex position in many games. So Inyan has won against Nitin. Yes, it was a position where black was in zugzwang, and yeah, we were close to this position. There's no pieces were moving, and going into a5, it's a permanent pin. This is an example of permanent pin, multi-pin, and a piece which has been lost without any counterplay. Badly played King's Indian defense. So now we have Alexei Fedorov, Belarus, has already reached 6 points, and Inyan has reached only 5.5. Deepan Chakravarti and Taibaz also 5.5, which means that Fedorov maintains the lead with a score of 6 points, and nobody at 5.5 points. So Fedorov is moving smooth, lead after 6th rounds and lead after 7th rounds also. So let's watch the games tomorrow at 2 p.m. and we'll have 3 more exciting games, and let's see how the players do towards the end, and when they're slightly different. But yes, Fedorov maintaining the lead is one of the important issues. Let's see. Indians are also as strong, but it's a very strong field with 16 countries participating in 4 continents, and South America participating for, I think, very rare for Indian chess. So we have this 7th round of 2nd Indore International Grandmaster Chess Tournament about to be over, and the 16 countries are participating, total of 131 participants, including 10 grandmasters, 2 women grandmasters, 25 international masters battling out. We also have this is a masters event. We also have a event that is a challengers event where the players below 2000 are permitted to play. That has an entry of 287 participants. Lucrative prize fund for both the events. For the Masters event, the total prize fund is 21 lakhs, and for the Challengers event, it's 14 lakhs. 35 lakhs is the prize money. The tournament is being sponsored by various organizations, a lot of companies: Indore Waste Management, Red Cross Society, Path Foundation, Navin Florin, Goyal Group, HDFC Bank, Dilip Buildcon, Kirloskar Brothers, and Mega Developers. So big tournament, and with lot of sponsorship, lot of cash prizes being organized at the beautiful venue of IPS Academy and Indore Public School and IPS Academy. So we'll have a look at the 8th round games tomorrow, and 9th round and 10th round. The last round will be in the morning at 10 a.m. but tomorrow's and day after, the 8th and 9th round, will be played at 2 p.m. every day. So I'll see you at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Bye till then.